still this curiosity, this sense that there's something beyond the physical. We just know there's something out there. And we're trying to just, figure it out and maintain enough distance that it doesn't bite us. But the supernatural events that exist on their own, out there in a vacuum with no relevance to our lives, they lack the power to really change us. But when God comes through miraculously with a mortgage payment that saves your house, that changes you. It becomes part of your personal resume, which qualifies you for greater disasters in the future. Congratulations. And your neighbors will take notice. Your family will take notice. Now God, who is working in all things for the good of those who love Him, sometimes decides to allow all hell to break loose in our lives. There are plenty of times that He doesn't, that He specifically lowers His hand and stops the flood. And we know that He did, and we're grateful. But there are times when He chooses to sit back. And He says to Satan, okay, you can have him, but don't touch his skin, or don't touch his body, or don't touch this, or don't touch that, as He said to Job. Not a fun thing. So, what are the things that influence God to allow these things to happen in our lives? Here's a couple of things to think about. When He's wishing to distinguish Himself and to glorify Himself and to distinguish us from all other religious folks, to give our story credibility, God will allow all hell to break loose. And another possibility is when He's wishing to give us a private history with Him that qualifies us for greater and greater displays of His power in the future. Those are two specific instances when God will allow the bottom to fall out. Now, like everyone else, we tend to dread a crisis, and when they come, we tend to think that God has either abandoned us, or maybe He wasn't even there in the first place. We begin to question, or maybe our performance has been so sloppy as a believer that we're just assuming that He's disciplining us. When our behavior counts the most is usually when we're at our worst, unfortunately. But if we believe Romans 8:28, that God is indeed working in all things for our good to conform us to the character of His Son, if we believe that, then when tragedy strikes, we ought to view it as a setup. We ought to view it as a setup. Now let's turn to 1 Samuel 17. Verse 1. I'm going to read fast because we have a lot to cover there. Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Soko in Judah. They pitched camp at Ephes Dammim. If you're reading these words to your 5-year-old, good luck. They pitched at Ephes Dammim and between Soko and Azekah. And Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with a valley, the valley of Elah, between them. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp, stood out from the lineup. His height was 9 feet 9 inches. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he wore a coat of scale armor of bronze, weighing 5,000 shekels, or 125 pounds. And on his legs he wore bronze greaves. Greaves are little plates between your knees and your ankles. And a bronze javelin was slung around his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. That's about 15 pounds, or a couple of gallons of milk. That's a pretty heavy head. I wouldn't be able to throw that thing. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood, and he shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistines said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel." That's a challenge. "Give me a man and let us fight each other." A battle between champions, a tradition in the ancient Near East, was fairly common. Conquest was achieved, or disputes were settled by a fight between the strongest members of each party. It was believed that the god of each nation would determine the outcome. Victory vindicated the army of the winner, and it proved the superiority of their god. Goliath was clear about his objective. Verse 9 says, "You will become our subjects and serve us." So the issue was complete subjugation. Verse 11. On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Here's the dilemma. The Philistines, I don't know if you know about this point in history, but the Philistines had iron. The Israelites did not have iron. And the Philistines also made sure that all the ironsmiths in the land were on vacation in Acapulco that weekend. So not one soldier in the Israelite army had a sword or a spear. All they had was sharpened farming implements like plowshares and sickles. The Philistines had iron weapons, chariots. They had a much larger army, and they had some dudes the size of the Bronx. Bottom line, conventional warfare would have led to huge loss of life for the Israelites, and then ultimately to enslavement for their survivors. The contest between champions would avoid the military mismatch and spare a ton of lives, but still the enslavement would happen because of Israel's inability to match Goliath, to have someone that could go against him. So the choice was between one mismatch with catastrophic loss that led to enslavement, or another mismatch with the loss of only one life, but it still led to enslavement. Still had the same outcome. So what do you do when you have two options and they both are really bad? I was going to say really suck, but they're both really bad. Well, you pray for option number 3. Preacher's not supposed to say something. Verse 12. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. And Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time he was very old. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, and the third was Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days, the Philistine came forward every morning and every evening to take his stand. Now Jesse said to his son David, "Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to their camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are and bring back some assurance from them. They are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines." Then early in the morning, David left the flock in the care of a shepherd and loaded up and set out as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines, facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of the supplies and ran to the battle lines and asked his brothers how they were. And as he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance. And David heard it. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. Now, if you remember in verse 3, it said that there was a valley between the battle lines drawn by the 2 armies, Valley of Elah. Goliath stepped out from the Philistines and stood in the gap in that valley to taunt the Israelites. So if David heard Goliath, as the passage says that he did, from across the pass between the two armies, I think it's probable that he overheard the men all around him that were speaking among themselves. Verse 25, now the Israelites had been saying, do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him, and he will also give him his daughter in marriage. And she is seriously hot. And he will exempt his family from taking taxes in Israel. I wager that David heard these words, and perhaps more than once. Nevertheless, if we grant that David may have been distracted in conversation with his brothers and he didn't get the full gist of what was being said, right? He could have just asked a question and gotten clarification. But he did a little more than that. Listen to what David said on verse 26. David asked the men standing near him, what will be done to the man who kills the Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? And who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? So David adds a little extension to the end of his question that shows that he's not afraid of this guy. Verse 27, they repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, this is what will be done for the man who kills him. So at this point, now we know for sure, David knows what's going to be done for the guy who kills Goliath. Verse 28, when Eliab, the oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those little sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. The passage says that Eliab burned with anger when he heard him speaking with the other men. So clearly it was something that David must have said that made him angry. And my bet is that it was that little tag at the end of his question. I mean, if you're Eliab, you're the oldest brother, and from what is said in an earlier passage, you're like a big handsome guy, and you're out there with these soldiers, and you're all quaking in your sandals because of this big giant, and this little squirt comes around and he's like talking trash, like, whiz, you know, it makes you look stupid, right? It makes you look like, what, you don't have